I'm going to try to bring a slightly different lens to this discussion, and that's the lens of curator. If you don't know 01, the organization for which I'm the executive director, we are the host and organizer of what is the largest contemporary art biennial at this intersection of art and technology here in North America. So my remarks are really kind of stem from that lens, that perspective. Our job to help contextualize and put in perspective for audiences the great work that's being undertaken. So, we live in really complex times, challenging times, provocative times, facing the challenges of a 21st century world requires new forms of creativity and innovation, and it's clearly been illustrated today. Then these lead towards something, and they do lead towards a more sustainable and resilient world. So part of what was going around in my head in this morning's conversation is creativity for what? So at 01, we believe that art at the frontier of technology broadens our critical understanding of the world by provoking new ideas, experimentation, and creative strategies. We believe that unbridled experimentation with the realities of an increasingly complex and unknown world inevitably leads to new forms of knowledge, leads to new cultural production. It leads to alternative ways of being, and most importantly, illuminates new creative strategy. Our new center, the 01 Garage in San Jose, is envisioned as a platform for risk takers from the arts, from the sciences, technology, academic research, and the corporate sector to interact, engage, and spur innovative social change. So you can think of it as sort of part exhibitions center, part think tank, part incubator, and I often describe it as a kind of discourse platform rather than a traditional presenting arts facility where the objective is to broaden the larger conversation, be a catalyst for that conversation regarding the role of the arts in contemporary culture. So I'd like to offer 4 frames that help guide much of my approach and our organization's approach to the programming. Could I have this next slide, please? Radical connectivity is a reference to what will be the transformative nature of computational ubiquity. And of course, what's beyond today's capabilities with the current nature of the internet. And we hear a lot about the Internet of Things. It is a reality. It is coming. Everything will be connected to everything else. While infinite data is a reference to there being more data generated at a faster rate than can be assimilated and therefore used. These two things combine into an incredibly rich problem set. Next slide, please. Since its creation in 2004, and it's only 2004 since 2004, Facebook has grown into a worldwide network of over 1 billion users. The number of mobile phones is expected to exceed the world's population of 7 billion this year. Next slide, please. So we are interested in artists as anticipators of that backdrop, doing things now that illuminate, critique, and provoke ideas about what this future might look like. So from converging data visualization with architecture, I sort of made a disruptive act because the previous slide was a Richard Meyer building in downtown San Jose that has an algorithmic projection system that illuminates the structure in an ever-changing way. So this idea of converging data visualization with architecture to that of a city as a public interactive game that's played on your mobile device that incorporates augmented reality. These new forms of connectivity are opening up radical ways in which we can combine data, combine computing to create real-world experience. Next slide, please. I'm very interested in working with artists who engage with the frontiers of science as their work is necessarily hybridized. Their work And the creative strategies reflect the complexity of challenges, critique, and provocations that emerge when ideas, subjects, tools, and strategies collide. Next slide. This is an example from Symbiotica from Australia, which is growing tissue, live tissue in a sculptural form in a laboratory that you can produce from Home Depot. Next slide, please. To Eduardo Koch, who is probably best known for his early work in transgenics, where he moved the phosphorescent gene from algae into a rabbit, which caused the rabbit to glow green under certain wavelengths of light. Here's a book that we featured this past year at the Biennial. It's called Aroma Poetry, which is the first book of pages that are smelled by activating nanotechnology behavior of the pages as you turn the leaves in the book. So you actually smell your way through the book. It's called Aroma Poetry. Next slide, please. We heard a bit about participation this morning, but the point I'd like to make about participation is that this segregation between the author and reader is no longer sacrosanct. How work is produced, shared, and experienced is emerging new typologies of relationships with audiences, as collaborators, audiences as co-authors, audiences as players, as distributed networks. Next slide, please. The very nature of the relationship between maker and audience begins to collapse, while collaborations naturally emerge from hybridized and intersecting networks. In this piece, this is Stephanie Zaijuko's open source reading room, which was a library that was created from illegally uploaded manuscripts to the internet and then printed out into physical books that were featured at the Biennial. And you as an audience member could come into the space and sit with the librarian, and if you had a text that had been illegally uploaded that you would like to include in the library, we were happy to print it out for you. Some begging questions of copyright and information property, but very much reliant on the audience interaction with the artist. Next slide, please. It's these new forms of participatory art that serve to directly engage the audience in the creative process, allowing them to be more present as interactive observers and contributors. So from physically realized open source libraries of illegally uploaded manuscripts to, in this case, live cinema, in which the narrative is both nonlinear and realized by public actors in the street, to social media art forms, the collapse of the author, the reader, the observer is a result of the many possibilities of modern technoculture. Next slide. For the world to change, cultures must change. And culture is where artists innovate. Next slide. At 01, we see artists/engineers, artists/scientists, artist-technologists, artist-entrepreneurs, artist-attorneys as the new provocateurs and an untapped resource of innovation. In this, I wanted to talk just briefly about these two last examples because I think they illustrate this idea very, very clearly. One of the things that 01 does is that we have a fellows program where fellows are invited to come in for a one-year period of time to do deep creative research and prototyping and incubate ideas. But the ideas are fostered from a collaboration between 01 and a sponsoring organization or corporation or civic agency or a cultural agency. And the Innovation Challenge is set forth to provide a mechanism for the artist to respond to in order to do the kind of creative strategy, bring creative strategy from their practice to those specific problem sets. It's a recognition that innovation is not the sole domain of companies or research labs or entrepreneurs, but the arts have a very important role to play, and the artist can innovate in that social space. So in this is an example that came out of this past year's Fellows Program by a young artist, Daniela Steinaspar, out of the D School at Stanford. And the sponsor was Adobe's Creative Technologies Laboratory. And we worked with Adobe over the course of the year to develop an innovation challenge around the next creative tool. Daniela's background was in narrative, and she was very interested in what telling stories could be in the 21st century, especially if you're 13 years old. So she's developed a project that uses something called semantic analytics, where your phone pays attention to your text messaging in such a way that it can determine the emotional quality of the texting, and it can also determine the content of the text, which allows it to do quick data mining on your phone to dig into your Pinterest, Instagram, Google, Facebook files and pull forward relevant, rich media that can be combined in real time into your text messaging. It's a new tool. It was patented this year, and it resulted from an artist working on a problem of how do we tell stories. Pretty cool. Next slide. This is my new favorite thing right here. This is an artist, is Phil Ross from San Francisco. What Phil has done is he's a sculptor, but he came up with a process of using mushrooms and mushroom cultures to build to design architectural building materials. So he has a technique where he compresses the mushroom cultures into forms. The cool thing about these forms is that it creates bricks, in this case, that are 10 times harder than concrete, 10 times lighter than concrete, can be fused to other materials like themselves or wood, can be grown in your backyard, and you can imagine building your house without a screw or without a nail. So this is truly a revolutionary technology, if you will, and Phil is in the process of commercializing this or bringing it to market by not actually making bricks, but making the goo that makes the bricks. So his factory will produce the goo, and the goo can be spread out on, like 4x8 sheets of plywood would look like. It could be like building material in that sense. It could be a brick, or it could be put into a hose and sprayed, or any other imaginable configuration of taking the goo and giving it form. So his work is really involved in, not the actual outcome, but actually building the factory that's going to result in this. So these last two works came from an exhibition called Patent Pending that we hosted this past spring, which focused on artists whose creative work has led to U.S. patent. And whether that was intentful or was done for protective reasons or whether it was forced upon them, there was a large discourse around and conversation around the role of patent, the role of information property, the role that artists play in innovation. And that's the kind of backdrop that we attempt to create at 01. So artists are doing pretty cool things. They're working across every imaginable discipline and frontier. Their relationship with science isn't to change science or make science better, per se, but it is to recognize that knowledge production occurs in a multitude and multiplicity of ways, and that the artists bring to the table the intellectual, the aesthetic, and the theoretical capacity to inform new creative ways of addressing complex, intractable problems that we face as a society, as a culture, and as a global humanity. So at 01, it's our goal to impact that ecosystem, of innovation at the front end. So if you think about innovation as kind of being an arc, where design thinking certainly has its place, where it drives forward the ability to sort of take ideas and move them into a productization or into the appropriate market or to address a specific problem. There's something that has to happen before that. And that thing that happens before that, where the arts play, is in this radical experimentation, this unbridled moment of investigation that talent brings to the table that allows things to be brought into the world that never would have happened. Thank you.